We just got some new data that suggests that 2028 might just be a little too long to wait for the Steam Deck 2. How's it going, everyone? As always, my name is Jimmy Champagne. This is Deck Ready, my channel all about the Steam Deck. So if you didn't catch my video last week, there was a new leak surrounding the Steam Deck 2 that said it's going to come out in 2028. And normally I don't really care about leaks and rumors, but this one's coming from Kepler and on my PlayStation channel PS Ready, leading up to the PS5 Pro and going back to the PS5 Slim, Kepler was spot on with a ton of their leaks surrounding that thing, like with specs, and also the actual chassis for both machines came out from that person. So as far as leaks go, I wouldn't call any of these leakers trustworthy, but it seems like whoever their sources are, they're pretty, believable when it comes to this stuff being right. And my thought process with the whole thing is that there's two sides you can really look at. On the one side, there's the gamer who plays everything new. They want to have the latest and greatest tech at any given time. Those are the people that might feel like they want a Steam Deck 2 a lot sooner than 2028. And then on the other hand, you've got people with an insane backlog that actually like playing through all the games they purchase. So if you have to wait till 2028, you probably have a lot of games saved up that you could actually just continue playing until that thing comes out. And then you also have to factor in all this other hardware that Valve is allegedly working on, like the Fremont console, the Deckard headset, the Steam Controller 2, the new VR controllers, Half-Life 3, and it seems like there's enough stuff to carry us from now, 2025, about to be 2026, which is crazy, all the way through the next 2 years going into 2028. And then the third thing to keep in mind is that SteamOS is coming to other platforms. It's already out now on the Legion Go S, which I don't think is selling all that well, which isn't necessarily surprising because, the Z2 Extreme chip is right around the corner with the Legion Go 2, and it loses features like having detachable controllers. So there's not a huge market for that thing to begin with. And the performance gains you get going to the Z1 Extreme from the Steam Deck's chip aren't really all that special. When you consider that, you'd have to run most games at 800p and you're getting like 5 or 10 FPS at max. So if you're playing at 40, you're going to get 50. If you're playing at 30, you're going to get 40. That one is more consequential, but largely the Z1 Extreme is powerful, but it's not that much more powerful than what we already have. But I think it's safe to assume that that's going to be one of at least a few SteamOS equipped devices that aren't made by Valve. So once the Z2 Extreme is out there and populated in other machines, you'll either be able to buy a Windows version and install SteamOS on it because they're all using AMD chips, except for the MSI Claw. And then also you'll get official versions that get direct support from Valve. And even with the ones that aren't directly supported because you can buy them with SteamOS, they are baking features in for like the ROG Ally, Ally X, and a few other ones into these updates. So no matter which device you buy, you should be covered. But after thinking about it over the weekend, I was starting to feel like 2028 just feels weird. It seems like it's a little too long. And then I decided to look into it more, and it turns out that whatever source Kepler has is not directly at Valve, so it's secondhand information. So that made me initially dubious of the entire leak to begin with, which is good because, I'm heading down the road of thinking 2028 is too long. But then also I was reading up on news articles and I saw data that suggested that in the latest Steam hardware survey, instead of trending upwards like it had in the past, Linux actually lost user share on Steam by around 0.25%. So Windows went up by 0.25% and recaptured some of the ground that they lost to SteamOS. I would assume that's because all these graphics cards like the 5070 Ti, the 5090, the 5080, the regular 5070, the 9070 XT, they're actually available at stores now. Like I got a 9070 XT from Micro Center and I had plenty of options. There were a bunch of different brands I had never heard of. Even the brand I got, which was Power Color, again, I had never heard of it, so I hope it's good. They had multiple different 9070 XTs available. So knowing that these cards that you had to buy from scalpers for so long on eBay and other websites were not available, but are now, it makes sense that Windows would regain a little bit of ground in the overall standings of Steam user share. But if these cards do stay in stock, I feel like they're going to lose even more ground on Linux. And that's kind of the choice Valve needs to make here, because back in the day with Windows 8 and the whole inception of SteamOS in the first place, that was spurred on by Windows 8 being an objective disaster. Like Gabe Newell has that famous quote where he said it just made him sad or depressed or whatever when he saw what Windows 8 was becoming. And then they started to threaten the idea of needing to download every app from the Windows Store. That was their ultimate goal with Windows Phone and Windows 8 and everything. So then they started working on SteamOS with Linux to make sure that people would be able to access Steam forever, because, having to download Steam from a storefront that could turn off access to Steam at any given time would kill Steam as a brand overall, which would objectively be bad because Steam is great compared to all the other competitors. I know it has its issues. We talk about them all the time, but compared to the PlayStation PlayStation Network, the Xbox Live Network, whatever they're calling it now because they've changed the name so many times, and the Nintendo Switch Online Network, I think Valve is objectively the best because it's free, it actually is consumer friendly in most ways, and they do a good job making sure it actually adds free features all the time that continue to make it better instead of adding stuff they can charge you for a monthly subscription. We all know how that turned out with the first version of SteamOS, but here we are over a decade later and SteamOS is actually viable. I've got it on a desktop upstairs, I've got it on my Steam Deck, I've got it on my Legion Go S, and it's largely a great experience. Of course, it has bugs like anything else. Compared to Windows, I get better performance out of games and the overall interface is excellent, even compared to using big picture mode on Windows full screen. And Microsoft has definitely noticed. Later in the year, we're getting the Xbox full screen experience, which is just directly ripping off SteamOS, which is ultimately good because it shows that competition matters because, you know, Valve actually gaining ground and having a better operating system that runs games better than Windows is exactly what Microsoft needed to finally say, oh, maybe we should be investing in Windows to make sure it's a good gaming platform and can continue to grow instead of trying to make everything worse with every single new update, which is what they've done with Windows 11. And it's actually kind of insane. So when I hear 2028, it just doesn't make a lot of sense. They are in the prime position to release a revised version of the Steam Deck. They don't need to call it the Steam Deck 2. They could call it the Steam Deck Pro, the Steam Deck Plus, or whatever, because there's no reason not to release something like this. I understand not wanting one every single year. I don't want that. I complain about it all the time, how many different revisions of the Legion Go we've gotten, how many different revisions of the ROG Ally we've gotten, like 3 in a span of a couple of years, but like, it's been long enough. There's no reason not to release at least some sort of revision, whether it's the Steam Deck 2 or the Steam Deck Pro at the end of 2026. I talked to people on Steam, I talked to people in the comments. It seems like the vast majority of people are that first type of gamer I mentioned earlier in the video, where they want to buy tech and actually have it perform with the brand new games. I mean, Valve couldn't have anticipated how poorly Unreal Engine would perform on every piece of hardware under the sun, but the reality we live in is that Unreal Engine 5 seems to perform poorly in most cases on every piece of hardware under the sun. So I understand the thinking most people have. Again, most. I know there's people out there who are fine playing old games because that's me. I'm fine playing old games, but like Valve in some weird way owes it to the majority user base that wants to play the latest and greatest games. So like if they're directly asking for a Steam Deck revision at the end of 2026, I feel like it's worth actually releasing one and giving them what they want. And I don't think it would be that crazy of a decision to do so because they own the storefront. They can subsidize it. They can bring it in at a price point that's similar to what they're already charging for the regular Steam Deck. They could also drop the price of the Steam Deck OLED and keep that around for people who want to pay a little bit less than whatever they'd have to charge for this revised Steam Deck. But that's a benefit that companies like Asus, Lenovo, and everyone else don't have. And they're able to crank these things out every 6 to 8 months with brand new stuff like a bigger battery, better performance, and a better screen. So like if they can handle it and they're not even getting the subsidy from the storefront being owned by the hardware manufacturer, I think it's okay for Valve to kind of be aggressive about this. I know they're all perfectionists over there at Valve and they're really holding strong to that whole idea of not releasing a Steam Deck 2 until they can keep the same battery life for a generational leap in performance. So why not release a Steam Deck 1.5 and call it the Steam Deck Pro and leave it there for people who want the upgraded performance, and then the people who don't can stick with the Steam Deck they already have. Like I noticed that there's like a weird reaction sometimes where people get like vitriolic about this stuff. They're like angry about the idea of the Steam Deck getting a new model this soon. And I've noticed that with a small group of people, the idea of releasing a Steam Deck revision after 4 years, because we're talking 2026, is like met with vitriol. It really angers them, and I don't understand that. The idea of not wanting people who want better performance to be able to buy a device with better performance to get what they want, while you, the person who doesn't care about having extremely good performance and can live with the Steam Deck playing emulated games or small indies, I just don't get that. Like if you're fine with it, that's cool. If you want to play Vampire Survivors, you want to play PS2 games, you want to play GameCube games and whatever else, like stuff from your past because you like nostalgic stuff, that's fine as well. But like there is a big group of people out there who want to be able to play the latest and greatest games on their Valve made device. And I think that's fine because that's just what people want to do and they just make up the majority. So why not support them when they're directly asking for it? And I'm not trying to make it seem like there's a war between Windows and Linux. I don't think Linux is ever going to overtake Windows outside of like some extremely crazy reality where Windows just shits the bed so hard that it's the only other alternative that people can turn to. But I would like to see Linux get more of a market share because that competition is seemingly the only thing that ever inspires Microsoft to make positive changes to improve the overall usability of their operating system. It really does seem like the only time we get anything good out of Windows is when something goes catastrophically wrong, like the whole comparison between the Legion Go S Windows edition and the SteamOS edition actually being crazy in favor of the SteamOS version running like 10 to 20% better. That's what inspired Microsoft to go full forward on making sure that they actually fix Windows in the Xbox app to make it a true competitor to Steam. And that only benefits us in the long run because no matter where you're playing, you get a good experience that way. It's not like one's better than the other. They're both kind of doing similar things. And once they get to even level, that's when they start getting crazy with better consumer-friendly ideas to make their stuff stand out from their competition. And I want to point out that Valve is not really in the wrong for the position they're in. Like, they couldn't have predicted that every developer under the sun would use an engine that doesn't perform right on mid to low end hardware. Like, it's not just the Steam Deck that has problems with Unreal Engine 5. It's 4060 computers, it's 4070 computers, it's 5070 computers that can't even hold a rock solid 60 FPS without upscaling or using frame generation. So like, it's a weird situation they found themselves in, but it's also kind of on them, I think, to rise to the occasion and start putting out hardware that can actually live up to that. I think it's awesome when people hang on to stuff for a long time, but that should not be the default. Like my cowboy boots, I bought them 2 years ago. Instead of buying new ones when they get a little ratty, I take them over to the shoe repair guy and he gets them looking like new, and I pay $100 for it instead of $300 for a new pair of boots. So I definitely see the utility in that, but you got to keep up with current trends if you want to be a market player. And the Steam Deck is like right there at being able to get a little bit more mass market appeal. And I feel like if they released just some sort of revision, whether it's the Steam Deck 2 or not next year, that could be what pushes them over the edge. I would just love to be able to have reassurance that like most games are going to run acceptably on the Steam Deck. And acceptably to me is like 30 FPS, medium settings, FSR unbalanced in quality, and I'm not going to see insane stutters or, you know, mostly fine with some small dips, and it's running at like 22 FPS all the time, as the Reddit loves to hammer constantly. Like, I'm so sick of that, where they say mostly fine with some dips and the game runs at like 20 FPS. Like, it's cool that those resources exist. I'm just getting to the point that I wish they weren't a necessity. But yeah, I'm just kind of spitballing here. I'd love to hear what you think, as always, down in the comments below. As always, guys, my name is Jimmy Champagne. I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching, and shape on.